we're going to do is the same thing that we did last week. So we'll have a lecture this evening, and we gave Clyde Billington a broad topic, the reliability of the Bible, and so he's going to spend about 45 minutes on a lecture kind of helping us understand one aspect that helps us understand the reliability of the Bible, and then like we did last week, we're going to allocate about 25 minutes or so for questions and answers that you might have for him. And so a lot of you have great insight to offer, and I really appreciate that and value that very much. But I would ask if during the question and answer time, if you would limit it to questions that you have, since we have this unique opportunity to have 25 minutes to ask questions for Clyde, especially related to the material that he covers and maybe other things that sparks in you. So again, I'm just so thankful for you giving the time this evening, the preparation this evening. I'm going to pray for our time together, and then I'll turn it over to you. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to get together tonight and be sharpened, and to really have a greater understanding that you are who you say you are, and you do what you say you will do. And Father, we just thank you for the opportunities that we have to have conversations with others about you. And God, I pray that tonight would be something that strengthens us in our faith, and God gives us more confidence in our dialogue that we might have with those who are skeptical or even in opposition to your ways. So God, bless this time that we have tonight. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
As I've been telling all of you, those sheets that I gave you have nothing to do with the presentation, but I wanted to make a point with you. How many of you filled them out? Made your guesses? Okay, let's go through. You can grade them yourself. You don't have to turn them in. Here's the first one. How many think a turkey has more DNA chromosomes or a human? Turkey does. Absolutely right. How about a capuchin monkey or a silkworm? A silkworm does. How about a sheep or a strawberry? Strawberry does. Well, we'll see. A dog or a cat? Dog does. Dog has 78, a cat has 38. How about a potato or a human? Potato does. Okay. How about a hermit crab or a chicken? Hermit crab does. How about a polar bear or a chicken? The chicken does. Okay. How about a pineapple or a mouse? Pineapple does. How about a blue atlas butterfly or a blue whale? Butterfly, 448 chromosomes. A whale has 44. A gorilla or a skunk? The skunk does. Tobacco or a chimpanzee? That's a trick question. They both have 48, which is more than a human. A kiwi fruit or a horse? Kiwi fruit, 174. Horse has 68. A carp fish or a donkey? Carp fish. Okay. A gorilla or a human? A gorilla does. Okay. Of all the supposedly great apes, realize that humans have the less chromosomes. Did you know that? Notice that capuchin monkey up there had 54. Okay. All right. A gypsy moth or a blue whale? The moth does. Cotton or a cat? Cotton does. Okay. A polar bear or a carpfish? Carpfish does. A skunk or a human? A skunk does. Now, if you think about evolution, we'll come to that last question in a minute. Evolution is like a great big V, right? You start with this very small bit of matter and it begins to develop into animals and plants, right? It should be very organized if you're in evolution, shouldn't it? Is this organized? Not in the least. Actually, it's a very good argument for individual creation of these creatures by God when you start looking at it. Now that last question, circle the one with more chromosomes than humans. All of them are. And by the way, all of them have 48 chromosomes. So there's no order at all in chromosomes. in genetics. No order at all. It looks exactly like what it is. God created them individually. This is why, by the way, you will not have biologists talking about evolution when they're dealing with chromosomes or even with the genome. It does not work for them at all. Okay, let's get started. We're going to deal just basically with Joseph and the Exodus. As much as I can get through in this amount of time, I'll try to save some time for questions at the end. Some of this material has not yet been published. It's in the process. So you get a little bit of new material tonight and some stuff from good friends of mine. I have a friend who's done a lot of work at Jericho. His name is Bryant Wood. I have a friend who is an Egyptologist. He's provided some of the material I'll give you here tonight. Another friend of mine who's an Egyptologist named Doug Petrovich. He's also provided some information for me that I'm going to use tonight. I should point out to you, by the way, it's interesting. I'm not going to do Jericho tonight. I don't have enough time for it. But Bryant Wood has his PhD from the University of Toronto, one of the best schools in ancient history and archaeology in the world, if not the best. Okay, there's a lady named Kathleen Kenyon. She went to Jericho and said, oh, there's no evidence at all here for Joshua. And everybody in every book has that in it today. The interesting feature is she has a BA degree and Bryant Wood has a PhD degree, and guess which one they follow? Her. Okay, let's get started. And we're going to do the Exodus. I don't know how you want to do this. I'm going to do a lot of slides. Maybe I just wave my hand. Okay, let's look at the first one here. Just to show you, by the way, in Egypt, they tell you where their power comes from. Notice these Egyptian symbols here, using snakes. Those are crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. Okay, let's go to the next one. And I can't spend a lot of time on this, but I want you to see here, this is basic Egyptian history. And I can't get into all the details. I wish I could. But what I want you to see is that Abraham visited Egypt around 2100 BC in what we call the first intermediate period. An intermediate period is when there are several kings in Egypt, all claiming to be the king. And there's problems. So Abraham was there during the first intermediate period. By the way, he came there more than 500 years after the Great Pyramids were built. They were very old when he came there. I'm going to deal with Joseph. Joseph came into Egypt during Dynasty 12. We have a lot of new information about Joseph. So let's go on. And then if you have some questions at the last, if I get to going too fast, somebody go like that, slow me down. Because this is stuff I know and you don't. Okay, so you can slow me down. All right. Let's take a look at Joseph in Egypt. And this is some really interesting stuff that's been coming out. And I'll show you some of the criticisms, or critics, Bible critics, some of the arguments that they've used against Joseph. Okay, now, by the way, it says here, the Midianites sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver into Egypt. Now it's interesting, we actually have from Egypt the price of a Semitic Canaanite. You need to realize the Israelites and the Canaanites speak exactly the same language. And Canaanites are exactly the same as Phoenicians. Are you with me? You've all heard of Carthage, the Carthaginians and Hannibal. The last part of the name of Hannibal is the name Baal, of Baal-Hadad, the Baal of the Bible. So the Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and the Canaanites are all the very same people. Now not only that, but the Hebrew language is basically identical to Canaanite. And their alphabets are essentially the same, only slight differences. So it was very easy for the Israelites, when they didn't get rid of all the Canaanites in the land, it was very easy for them to intermingle and slip into Canaanite religion. Are you with me? I just wanted you to know that as we go along here. Okay, so let's notice here, it's very interesting. As Kenneth Kitchen. Kenneth Kitchen is one of the great Egyptologists in the world, and he's a believer. And he's pointed out, you know, here you have in the Bible, they have exactly the right price, 20 pieces of silver at this point in time. Now, by the way, if I were to ask you today, how many of you could tell me the price of a slave just before the Civil War, how many of you could do that? I'm pointing that out because there are people who say, for example, most critics believe that the Old Testament, I'm talking about the first 5 books of Moses, were actually written in the 7th century BC. Okay, about 700 years after when the Bible indicates they were. Okay, they wrote it in the 7th century BC, and yet they know 1,000 years earlier, they knew the price of a slave in Egypt. See the problem for them? Okay, well anyway, let's go on to the next one. Okay, now this is a document called the Hayes Papyrus. And again, I don't want to lose you in all of this, but the Hayes Papyrus is amazing. It has two sides to it. It's a sheet of paper. On one side, there's a list of Semitic Canaanite slaves. One of those slaves is named Benjamin. This is not the Benjamin of the Bible, don't get me wrong. But this document actually dates to the time of Joseph. It dates to the time when there was a Benjamin as one of the 12 sons of Israel. Are you with me? That shows us that that name was in use at the very time the Bible says it was. Names go in and out of style in history, even in America. How many of you know someone named Agnes? Okay, at one time that was a very popular name. Now you all know, almost no one is named Agnes, right? Well, anyway, so just to show you and point out to you here, we have someone named Benjamin. Now the interesting thing, we have a list of Canaanite slaves who've been sold into Egypt, just like Joseph. On the back side of that is a description of the very prison in which Joseph was placed. No question about it. As a matter of fact, it even mentions the warden who is mentioned there in the text in Genesis. The very same official is mentioned in that prison. I should point out to you too, prisons are very uncommon in the ancient world. They had jails. They threw you in jail until they decided whether they were going to execute you, beat you, or send you out to some mine to be worked to death. They didn't put you in a prison and let you sit there for a while, which is what happened to Joseph. In Egypt, that was different. So notice there was a prison, and we have that prison described on the Hayes Papyrus. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, now Joseph is bought by Potiphar. He's going to become the steward of the house. That means he's in charge of everything that goes on there. Agriculturally, everything that goes on, he's the guy that gets it done. Shows you how smart this young man was very early. By the way, God is providing training for him for his next big job, as I'll show you. The guy you see sitting there under the, he's got sun protection, notice that. He is a steward. He has exactly the same job that the Bible said Joseph had in the house of Potiphar. Okay, next slide. Now, the actual Pharaoh that Joseph is going to be dealing with is Sesostris II. By the way, see Amenemhat up there, the first? He was assassinated. And that's a little bit of a background of what we're going to see. So Joseph now is serving under Potiphar. Potiphar is an official of the Pharaoh, in this case, the Pharaoh being Sesostris II. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Now, we have this story in the scriptures, I'm sure you've all heard of it. One day Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. Potiphar's wife caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." And he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. And she's going to tell her husband that Joseph tried to rape her. And Joseph, as a result, is going to end up in prison. Next slide. Now, the interesting feature is that we actually have a story, and I think this story actually comes from the very story we have of Joseph. This is much later. Joseph is around 1850 BC. This story actually dates to 1200 BC. But I want you to see how similar it is. I think it's been slightly changed to fit the Egyptians, but I want you to see it. So it's similar to the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. A younger brother worked the fields for his older brother. He goes from the field to the house. The wife of the older brother tries to seduce her husband's brother to commit adultery. The younger brother rejects, and his brother's wife accuses him of trying to rape her, and the older finally discovers the truth and kills her. I think that story is a reflection of the true story of Joseph much, much earlier. But it's interesting to see there was a story like that of Joseph. Okay. Now, remember, Joseph is in prison, and there are two people thrown into prison. The cupbearer, who serves the wine to the Pharaoh, and the baker. One of them has tried to poison the Pharaoh. That's what's going on here. He's trying to figure out which one is guilty. It's very common for there to be an attempt on the life of a ruler. So one of them has tried to kill the Pharaoh. So he's got the butler there and he's got the baker there. And both of them have a dream, and they bring in Joseph. And Joseph, first of all, tells the butler about his dream. And you can see it here. The chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream, and he said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put them into the cup of his hand. Joseph is going to tell him, this is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will again put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to when you were his cupbearer. Now comes the time for the baker. And I'm not going to read all. I wanted to point out to you, by the way, it's interesting in Egyptian iconography, artwork and so forth, whenever they show vines and grapes, it is always has 3 vines to it. Always. It's almost like, whoever wrote the book of Genesis, I think it was Moses, knew exactly what the culture of the Egyptians was. It always shows 3 vines, just as in this story. Okay, let's go on to the next one. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but of course, the baker is the guilty guy, and he's going to take and have his head cut off, and he's going to be put on a tree for the birds to eat his flesh. And that turns out to be true. Now, Joseph had told the butler, when you get back to Pharaoh, remember me, I'm sitting in this prison. And get me out of here. But of course, the butler's going to forget about him until such time as the Pharaoh has a dream. Okay? And this is the Pharaoh. Almost without question, this is the Pharaoh. His name is Sesostris II, and he's the guy that has the dream, and he's the guy that promotes Joseph. Okay? Now, another document. This document is really they think it is very early. It claims to be around 2750 BC, before the Great Pyramids were built. What I want you to see in it is, notice what it says. Those who are in the palace were sick at heart from a great evil, because the Nile had not flooded during my reign for a period of 7 years. Okay? So all of this undoubtedly, I think, was in the mind of this Pharaoh. He's got a guy there that's telling him, you're going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and he's saying, oh, that fits my culture, that fits what I know. You understand what I'm saying here? It's interesting to see this particular document fits in that way. Okay? This is actually a little bit of their artwork, and if you can see it, you have a bunch of very, very skinny Egyptians who are starving. So they did have times when the Nile River would not flood and fill their fields with water. That's the way they grew crops there. Then there would be a great famine, and that's what's going to happen in the days of Joseph. Okay, and here, just to show you some Egyptian artwork, here's some fat cattle, and then this is a modern artist's version of that. You can see the skinny cattle and the fat cattle, and the fat heads of grain and the poor heads of grain that are in the vision there that Pharaoh has, this dream that he has. By the way, that fits too. Dreams are very important in the ancient world. It wasn't just the Egyptians, but we actually have Egyptian texts that tell us how to interpret dreams. So this is something that was very, very common. Okay? And Joseph, we interpret this for you. Before he's taken before Pharaoh, we were told that he has shaven a haircut. Now the ancient Egyptians, in the royal family particularly, would shave all of the hair off of their body. Now you see them wearing hair, but those are actually wigs. I don't know if I got a picture in this presentation, but I could show you the wig box of Tutankhamun, King Tut. So they would wear a wig. And this was done as a type of cleanliness, and it probably did serve a real function, because if you know anything about fleas and fleas and lice, one of the things they need are hair. So if you shave all the hair off, you have less of a problem for that to happen. So this guy's getting a haircut, just like Joseph did. Okay? And then Joseph will tell Sesostris II that there will be 7 years of great harvest, followed by 7 years of crop failures and famine. Okay? Now, one of the things that Pharaoh will do, he puts the translation is a gold chain. And there's really not a good English word to describe one of these things. It's kind of a big fat necklace, and you can see one right here. And I'll show you a guy wearing one in just a second here. This is the type of necklace that would be put on. That's fine, just keep it right there. Now Joseph is going to be given 3 jobs. Okay? He's going to be called Father of Pharaoh. There are only 2 people that got that title. The father-in-law of Pharaoh will be called Father of Pharaoh, and also the guy who gave him his education, in charge of his education. Now we know that Pharaoh did not marry the daughter of Joseph, So almost certainly, this was the guy in charge of the education of his children. Almost certainly in charge of the education of Sesostris III. Very interesting pharaoh that we can't get into some of the details. Am I losing you in all this? Okay. Now the next job, he's supposed to move back in just a minute. We'll come to this one. Next job is he's going to be chief steward. He's over the royal palace and over all royal lands. He's the guy in charge of the crops. He's doing actually the same job he did earlier for Potiphar, only it's for all of Egypt just about. Okay? He's the chief steward. And then he's the vizier. The vizier is the prime minister. That's the most powerful of these positions. He basically rules Egypt for Pharaoh. It's a position we know of in Egyptian history, very familiar with it, and so forth. Okay, next one. And this is a chief steward. This is the guy that held the very position that Joseph held, but he held it about 100 years earlier. Notice his neck has one of those necklaces on. That's exactly what Joseph would have worn. Okay? Now, let's go on to this next one. The problem is, the critics say, oh, wait a minute. No Egyptian official ever held both the jobs of vizier and chief steward. It's like saying you're the vice president and the secretary of state. No one holds those two positions together. And the Bible says that Joseph held those two positions together. The Bible must be wrong, right? Except they got to examining a tomb of a guy named Khnum-Hotep III. Very interesting tomb. Guess what? We found out he held both of those positions. As a matter of fact, Charles Ayling, the Egyptologist friend of mine, a believing Christian, he actually believes Khnum-Hotep III was the guy who replaced Joseph. In all Egyptian history, the only one we have recorded of Joseph is just in the Bible. I think we found Joseph's tomb. I'll show you that in a minute. But the only guy in all of Egyptian history that we have recorded that held both of those positions is Khnum-Hotep III, and he reigned right after the time of Joseph. I think that's interesting, isn't it? Okay? Let's go on. This is the tomb of Khnum-Hotep III. Very interesting. You see it there. It's at Beni Hassan. Okay, next one. I'll come back to that. Some of the things about Khnum-Hotep III. As we said here, held the two highest positions in Egypt, vizier and chief steward. Served under Pharaoh Sesostris III. He was the guy. Sesostris II is alive when the 7 years of plenty are going on. Then he dies before the 7 bad years come on the scene. And his son, Sesostris III, is the Pharaoh. And this guy served under the latter part of the rule of Sesostris III. He almost certainly was the replacement of Joseph. Joseph almost certainly knew him. Joseph probably trained him. I'm dead serious about that. Okay? Now, by the way, in his tomb, as I'm going to show you, we have a painting of Edomites. I think they're Edomites, and I'll show you why. But almost always, you've probably seen this in Bible dictionaries. They have a picture of these people coming into Egypt, much like the Israelites did, looking like the Israelites, as I'll show you. But I'll show you that picture and tell you why I think they're Edomites in a minute. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Now, before we take a look at the Edomites, the picture found in the tomb of Khnum-Hotep III, I want to show you this particular map here. You see that area over there called the Fayum Oasis? Okay, see that little canal that cuts through there? You know what the name of that canal is? In Arabic, yet today, they call it Joseph's Canal. Now, I can't tell you for certain that Joseph is the guy that cut that through there. But it's certain, almost certain, that it was cut there during the time or just before the time of Joseph. The interesting feature is it brought a whole bunch of new land into cultivation. Okay? The Nile was diverted there and a whole bunch of land was brought into cultivation. Okay? Now you can't see this very well, but this is actually what we in Iowa would call a version of a silo. A place where you put grain. And these guys are dumping bags of grain. I don't know why it's so blurry, but they're dumping bags of grain into this 4-chambered silo. Okay? Now remember, the Bible tells you that there was so much grain produced during the 7 years that Joseph stopped even trying to count it. Is there archaeological evidence for that? Now, by the way, I should point out, when I'm talking about archaeological evidence, let me point out to you 2 problems. Okay? First problem is, and I'll illustrate this, I was at a meeting of the nearest archaeological society. I was talking to an Egyptologist. We were talking about how much excavation has been done. He said he thought maybe 1%. An active archaeologist was standing beside us. He kind of jumped into the discussion, and he said it's lucky if it's 1/10 of 1%. So when you start talking about the Bible, I want you to realize that at least 99% of the available information is still out there to be dug up. When you run across someone who says to you, we don't have any archaeological information, what you want to say to them, get your brush, get your trowel, get a ticket to Israel, and come and dig. Because we got a whole lot yet to do. Now, having said that, there's still a lot of stuff that's been discovered. The other problem I want you to understand is interpretation. It's one thing to find it, it's another thing to interpret it. And that's where you also have a problem. Okay? By the way, I talked to you about Kenneth Kitchen. Kenneth Kitchen, who is British and has done some remarkable things. He's a believer. One of the top 2 or 3 Egyptologists in the world. Kenneth Kitchen has a quotation I want to leave with you, because you're going to run into people who say, we have no evidence. He has a little saying, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Okay? Just because you can't find something doesn't mean it didn't happen. Are you with me? The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But anyway, now let me show you something. Having said that, in Egypt, I would be surprised. Most of the archaeological work in Egypt has actually been done up into the south, not in the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta has a problem with water, the water table, and it's very difficult to do archaeological work there. I would say probably at least 80% of all the archaeological work has been done in Upper Egypt, not in the Delta. Where were the Israelites? They're in the Delta. So there's a lot of information there that hasn't been dug up. But anyway, now let me show you some of the things that have been found though. This dates right to the very time of Joseph. Guess what that is? See that guy up there, buddy? We're not talking about a little thing here. What in the world is this? This is a grain silo. And it dates right to the time of Joseph. They've got all that grain coming in. Remember, they're going to feed not only Egypt, but basically all of the eastern Mediterranean world. Remember Jacob sending his son down to get grain and so forth? They have a tremendous amount of grain that came in during those 7 years, and Joseph had to store it up. Where is he storing it up? This is actually a giant silo. You took the steps down to get the grain. You filled it up with grain. You took the steps down to get the grain when you needed it. We found several of these, by the way. Okay, next one. Here's another one of them. Next one. Here's another one of them. We have various varieties. Here's another set of them. These are round ones. Those look more like grain silos in Iowa. Okay? Remember, 99% of the information is still out there. So it's very interesting. We actually have archaeological evidence that supports the 7 good years. Okay? Let's go on. So here we have, this is Sesostris III. I think actually Joseph was in charge of his education. Okay? Next one. This is a diagram of his pyramid compound. Next one. Okay. Now let's go back to the tomb of Khnum-Hotep III at Beni Hassan. It shows him as a vizier meeting with foreigners that are coming into the land, just like Joseph did with his brothers who came into the land. He's doing exactly the same job. The interesting feature is that these are near relatives of the Israelites. I don't think they're the actual Israelites. I think that they're Edomites, but let me show them to you. Okay, this is his tomb again. You can see some of the pictures on the wall, but I want to show you some specific pictures, okay? Here we have, these are Semitic peoples coming into the land. I want you to notice their haircuts. It's called a mushroom hairdo. Very significant, as I'll show you. They have a mushroom hairdo because it looks like a mushroom. Very distinctive. Okay, some more of these. See the kids packed up and so forth. Okay, the next one. See the mushroom hairdo, by the way? Notice the colorful dress they have. Okay, and then the final one. Notice this guy, by the way, has a coat probably much like that of Joseph. See that? Now, why do I say these are Edomites? Because they're coming down into the land and they're selling blue and black eyeshadow that almost certainly came from copper ore. Where's copper ore found? It's found in Edom. Now, it doesn't call them Edomites. It actually uses another name for them, just a kind of a general term. But this is almost certainly what the Israelites looked like when they came into the land. Okay, are you with me? Okay, let's go on. Now, see that place that's called Tel El Daba? Tel El Daba has, basically, that's a modern name of the archaeological site. It was dug by Manfred Bitak, who's an Austrian archaeologist. Now, Tel El Daba is also called Avaris, And in the Bible, it's called the city of Ramses. Very interesting site. It was the chief military base during the New Kingdom period. Okay, there is a port there for the Navy, because the greatest conquering pharaoh ever, I know you've all heard of Ramses II, the greatest conquering pharaoh ever was a guy named Thutmose III, the pharaoh of the oppression, but we'll get to that. You got to keep moving. What time do I need to quit?
6-ish.
Okay. Okay, is there a statue of Joseph? Actually, I think there is. Now, it's not in very good shape, because one of the things that will happen, and I can give you some evidence for this, is the Pharaoh of the Exodus is a guy named Amenhotep II, the son of the Thutmose III we just talked about. Amenhotep II, when the Exodus took place, goes bananas. One of the things he's going to do, and this is from a friend of mine who's done the work on this, one of the things he's going to do is he goes throughout Egypt and he took every statue of Hatshepsut. Who's Hatshepsut? Probably the princess who picked up Moses. Why does he go throughout all of Egypt and destroy all of her statues? She did. He went into her tomb and carved her name off of the tomb. Almost every statue we have of her is broken up into pieces. And I think he did it because he knew that she was the one that was the stepmother of Moses. Are you with me? Okay, we got to move on. All right? And this, you can see this has been broken up. Okay? Notice the hairdo. When you see that hairdo, the first thing you say is, oh, it's a mushroom hairdo. This guy is either a Canaanite, an Edomite, or an Israelite. In this case, I think it's an Israelite. But somebody's taken to his face and bulked the statue up. Now this statue, go to the next slide. This statue is interesting because, oops, I jumped ahead of myself. This statue is interesting because it's 1.5 times legal size, normal size. That means this is a big shot. He has a mushroom hairdo, and even some of the critics of the Bible said, well, if this isn't Joseph, it's an awful lot like him. This has to be someone who's held a position very high in the Egyptian government. He has a palace-like complex that's been found there at Tel El Daba by Manfred Bitak. Are you with me? And he was buried there. There are no idols or statues or Egyptian gods associated with that burial. And someone has taken to that statue and beat it into pieces, and probably Amenhotep II. Okay, are you with me on that? So it's very interesting. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Now this is something, by the way, that almost no one knows. During the second intermediate period, you have the New Kingdom period. Remember, the intermediate period is a time when there's chaos. At the end of the New Kingdom, period, the period of the Exodus, at the period of the Exodus, back up. At the end of the Old Kingdom period, we have the Old Kingdom, we have the first intermediate period, the New Kingdom, and then we have the second intermediate period. Okay, are you with me in that? Okay, so we're going to talk about the second intermediate period. It follows the period of Joseph, kind of heading into the Exodus. Follows the period of Joseph. The interesting thing about that is you have two sets of kings, one ruling at Thebes, one ruling at the city of Ramses. Are you with me? Two kings. The ones ruling in the city of Ramses are not native Egyptians. We usually either call them Hyksos or Canaanites. The interesting feature about that is during the 14th dynasty, there are two sets of dynasties, one up at Thebes and one down in the Delta. The interesting thing about that is that during the 14th dynasty in the Delta area, there were two pharaohs there who were named Jacob. Are you with me? Two pharaohs named Jacob, which I think shows you that the real Jacob was there at one time. This is not Jacob of the Bible. It is interesting, there were two pharaohs down there. Remember, there are two pharaohs, one in the north and one in the south. And the one there in the north, two of them were named Jacob. You're going to have a difficult time finding that in any text, but I'll guarantee you it's absolutely correct. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so let's look at the Exodus itself, and we've got to make some time here. Notice that the 1 Kings 6:1 says, in the 480th year, after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, which we know, we can date this almost absolutely correct, 966, In the month of Ziv, the second month, he, that is Solomon, began to build the temple. So the date of the Exodus then, we got 966, add 480, we come to 1446. Now there are three views on the Exodus. One says it didn't happen. You're going to run into that all the time. The evidence is building up in our favor, by the way. There are two other views, and let's take a look at the two views. One you have the early date, and one you have the late date. Okay, are you with me? The early date says the Exodus, taking those numbers as being accurate, says that the Exodus took place in 1446. Okay? We also say, because I'm one of these, that the 480 years are literal years. And that it took place during the reign of Amenhotep II. Now, if you've seen Charlton Heston, in the Ten Commandments, you had the late date. The Exodus took place in 1270 BC. The 480 years are not literal, and under Ramses II. By the way, I want you to know that I actually have the actual autograph of Moses. I did some work at one point in time, and Charlton Heston actually autographed his book and sent me a copy of it. So I've got Moses' autograph. Well, problem is, it was the wrong time span. It's not Ramses II. Very interesting pharaoh, but as far as being a significant pharaoh, his biggest accomplishments were he ruled for 67 years, and he had probably 200 children. I'm not kidding. He had about 200 children. I don't know if that's a record, but I like to point out it is above average. So I'm a defender. These two have been going back and forth, almost always held by Christians. There are a few non-Christians that actually held the the late date. So I'm a defender of the early date. And I've already told you to take and get that date, you take literally what the Bible says. Is there evidence to back up the early date? Yes, all kinds of it. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, I managed to write an article with Charles Ailing, the Egyptologist, and for me, this kind of won the argument. I think it really has won the argument. You'll see there, the name of the argument was the name Yahweh in Egyptian hieroglyphic text. Okay, next one. Now, there is a site, it's in the Sudan today, the northern Sudan today, and this actually contains the oldest reference, outside of the Bible, the oldest reference to Yahweh, or Jehovah. Okay, Jehovah is an artificial name. We're not going to get into that. But Yahweh is the way the name of God appears in the Old Testament. It first comes into use, if you read very carefully in the Scriptures, it first comes into use at the time of Moses. Okay? So let's take a look here. Now these are what we call enemy name rings. You'll notice these guys are bound, and you have the names of the people in it. This is the Pharaoh's way of saying, I'm the big shot, I conquered these people, and they're all under my control. We call that an enemy name ring. Now this is the one that's very significant. Because what this says in hieroglyphics, that first line up there says land of the Shasu of Yahweh. It has the name Yahweh in it. This is the oldest reference to Yahweh in any text that still exists today. Are you with me? It dates to 1385 BC. It was actually inscribed by Amenhotep III, the grandson of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. You follow my dating? Am I losing in all this? Okay, let's go on. But that's actually what it says. So we have the Shasu of Yahweh. What are the Shasu? Shasu means people who are herders, semi-nomadic. It's a perfect match for the Israelites. Okay? The land of the Shasu of Yahweh. This would have been, remember, if the Exodus took place in 1446, Jericho will fall in 1406. So this is a period of time when they're conquering the land. Okay? And we have this reference to them. As a matter of fact, there are actually two other references to Yahweh. One actually comes from the time of Ramses II. That very name Yahweh appears again. And then there's another one that's even later than that. So we have the name Yahweh. Okay? The land of the Shasu of Yahweh. Shasu means, as we said, it means that they're migratory herders, semi-nomadic, which fits the Bible. So you can see here, the Shasu were Semites who were semi-nomadic herders of sheep and goats in Canaan and the Transjordan area. That term Shasu is used, by the way, for Edomites, for Canaanites. It's rather interesting. We have an Egyptian text that almost no one pays any attention to that actually mentions that there are giant Shasu. Okay? We have a text that dates just slightly after the time of Moses that mentions giant Shasu. You know, in Egyptian measurements, which are very exact in how tall they ran, from 6'10" to 8.7 feet. Okay, so we have a text that mentions the giants. Okay, let's go on. This is actually a Shasu. Now I can't tell you it's an Israelite, but actually the hieroglyphics up there literally says that, Shasu. And notice again you have the old mushroom hairdo. Okay, maybe it'll come back one of these days. Okay, let's go on. Okay, Moses and Aaron then, Moses of course is going to be sent to the burning bush. We have to, kind of move along here. And, oops. Oh, back up just one on that. Back up one slide. I just wanted to point out, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what Yahweh, the Elohim, the God of Israel says, let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert. Pharaoh replied, who is Yahweh that I should obey him and let Israel go? Pharaoh was a god himself. He knows all the gods. Who is this God? Notice he's saying here, I don't know this God. So I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go. The interesting thing is, his grandson does know Yahweh. Are you with me? Okay? So the early date is the only one that I think matches the evidence. And as I said, Dr. Ailing and I actually wrote that article. It was known by some others. It's kind of one of those things, a very small group knew that reference to Yahweh was there at that Solid temple, and Chuck Ailing and I were the ones who wrote the article that kind of got it going. It was rather interesting to me, the number of scholars. I'm talking about scholars at big school who did not know about that reference to Yahweh in that Solid temple. Okay, let's go on. Moses, as I was saying here, the Bible indicates the name Yahweh first used with Moses. The Solid inscription made by Amenhotep the third in 1385 BC mentions Yahweh. The Exodus must be before 1385. You see the argument there, the reasoning there? Okay, so the early date is the one that really works, and you don't have to play any kind of funny games with the date of 480 from the time that Solomon built the temple. Okay, let's go on. Okay, there's another one. I'm going to go through this in a hurry, and I managed to write an article on this. It's called the Berlin Pedestal. Dates to the reign of Ramses II, the guy who is, supposedly for the late date of the Exodus. Dates to around 1250, and it mentions Escalon, Canaan, and Israel. Israel is already in the land when this takes place, and I'll show you that inscription. Move to the next one. And this is actually, over here is the name Escalon. This is the name Canaan. And that over there, even though it's broken, is still very clearly Israel. So here they are during the reign of Ramses II. They are clearly in the land, somewhere in the area where Escalon and Canaan are. And another evidence supporting the early date of the Exodus in 1446 BC. Okay, next one. Okay, now the site of the city of Ramses is today called Tel El Daba. It was also called Avaris, and it's called in the scriptures Ramses. It's being excavated, I think he's quit now, by Manfred Bitak of the Austrian Archaeological Institute. He found the naval base there. It's interesting, I can't go into the details, but Thutmose III, the greatest conquering Egyptian pharaoh ever, he took and built a navy, and he used his navy to go along the shore of the Mediterranean while his army was marching through it. He supplied and backed up his troops with his navy. He was pretty smart. By the way, he actually attended the same school as Moses did, founded by Hatshepsut, founded a palace school. Are you with me? It's interesting. That palace school produced Moses and Thutmose III. The greatest Egyptian conquering pharaoh ever came out of that school. I don't know, should I pick on Moses a bit? You know what the main thing that was taught in that palace school that Hatshepsut founded? Public speaking. Okay? I think Moses was telling a bit of a fib there with the Lord, right? Public speaking was the big thing that was stressed. But anyway, okay, he's found there. Remember, the Bible tells you that the Israelites are building a what's the term that's used there? It means a naval base and a military base. Notice here, Bitak has found barracks for troops and barns for chariot horses. Barn after barn after barn. He's also found silos. 30 silos so far have been identified. They're 18 feet in diameter. So he's also storing up a lot of grain there, you can see. Also in that city, BTEC has found mass burials of men. In the Egyptian world, remember, you were supposed to be mummified. You needed your body to enjoy the afterlife. They have mass burials of dead people. Holes are dug and people are thrown in. Sounds like what? Sounds like the 10 plagues. Okay? There are mass burials of men, cattle, goats, sheep, and dogs. Also, Manfred BTEC found out that the city was briefly abandoned during the reign of Amenhotep II. Somebody left. Okay, a bunch of people left. Okay, let's go on. Now you can see where Tel El Daba is at. See it over here? Okay, that whole area here of the eastern delta area would be the land of Goshen. And it was filled with foreigners. Okay, let's go on. Now, I can't spend a whole lot of time on this, and I'd lose you in the details, and I apologize for that. But you can see there, coming down to see Hatshepsut, in Egypt, you had to be born of the right queen. A pharaoh might have, like Ramses II, may have a whole group of women. But there's one lady that's called the wife of the god. Remember, a pharaoh was a god. While he's alive, he's basically identified as the god Amun-Re. When he dies, he becomes the god Osiris. The new pharaoh becomes Amun-Re. They don't think logically like we do. Okay? But a pharaoh was a god. His primary wife is called the wife of the god. You need to be born of the wife of the god. Are you with me? Okay, that's very important. That determines whether you're going to get to be the pharaoh. All of that to tell you, I can't go through all these details here, but you see Hatshepsut? She's the one in which the royal family line comes. Her father, Thutmose I that you see up there, was a general who married into the family. His right to the throne comes through his wife. Hatshepsut is the only child they had. Now by another wife, Thutmose I by another wife had a son called Thutmose II. His son doesn't have the right mother. So what he does is he takes, it's very common in Egypt, he marries his son, Thutmose II, to his daughter with the right royal blood, half-brother and half-sister. In Egypt, it was very common for half-brothers and half-sisters to marry. The old joke goes, in Egypt, there are no branches on the family tree. Okay? Almost always the marriage was between a brother and a sister, or a brother and a half-sister. All of that to tell you that the lady who has the right bloodline is Hatshepsut. Her husband dies and she rules. And she did an excellent job, by the way. And I'm almost positive, and my friend Egyptologist Chuck Ayling is also, the two Egyptologists I do a lot of dealing with, both of them are convinced that Hatshepsut was the lady who picked up Moses. Okay? She's a very interesting lady. But anyway, move on down the line there. Amenhotep II, notice by the way, Thutmose III did the oppression. He would have known Moses, they would have been in the same school together. Amenhotep II is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, 1446. Thutmose IV is not the oldest son. It's during his reign that Joshua is at Jericho. Notice Amenhotep III, he's the guy that mentioned the Shasu of Yahweh. You following with this? Notice Akhenaten. Oh, we got to deal with Akhenaten. Akhenaten is called the heretic pharaoh. He overthrows Egyptian religion. His father, Amenhotep III, the guy who made that inscription mentioning Yahweh, had already started the process. But Akhenaten is very interesting. He's sometimes called the first monotheist. That's why it's very important to figure out the dating of the Exodus, because some people have suggested, you have two views. Either this guy is reacting to what took place in the Exodus, or else Moses learned monotheism from this guy. Okay, he's the heretic pharaoh. How many of you heard about Akhenaten before? A few of you had? Okay, he's called the heretic pharaoh. Well, we got to move on, or I'll never get where I want to get. Okay, there's Hatshepsut. Okay, let's go on. And you can see there, almost certainly the one who adopted baby Moses. Her daughter was married to Thutmose III. She only has a daughter. She takes and her husband actually had another wife, had a son by another wife. His name is Thutmose III. Thutmose III was married to the daughter of Hatshepsut. Did I lose you in all that? Okay. By the way, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, her daughter who died young, they're married as children. Her daughter died young. But Hatshepsut was the aunt, the mother-in-law, and the stepmother of Thutmose III. She held all those positions. She was his aunt, stepmother, and also his mother-in-law. Okay? As we said, there are no branches on the family tree. But anyway, okay, let's go on. And her statues are going to be smashed. This is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Thutmose III, almost certainly. And you can see here some of the features. I can see he was the nephew, stepson, and son-in-law of Hatshepsut, greatest conquering pharaoh ever. He's going to build Tel El Dabas and the city of Ramses for chariots and so forth, conquers Canaan, made war way up, far enough up that he actually brought back some blondes as captives. He went clear on up in northern Iraq and headed up in that area and brought back some blondes as captives. I'll show you some just here in a minute. See the blonde there with blue eyes? Okay, let's go on. You'll never guess what. We'll back that up a minute. You back that up just one. Must be working in a donut shop. You know what those rings are? It's gold and silver. That's the way they had gold and silver, was the ring, and he's weighing it out. These are standardized weights. The bull and the sheep and so forth. Okay, let's go on. Okay. Now, Thutmose III has a vizier whose name is Rakbire. He was in charge of all building projects. We have his tomb. In his tomb, we have pictures of people making bricks, almost certainly Israelites. So I'm going to show you some Israelites making bricks. Okay, next one. Here they are. This is out of his tomb. They're getting water. They're mixing up the mud bricks. They're laying the mud bricks out. And next scene. And here they're using them for building. Notice, by the way, this guy's a blonde. The mixed multitude. Okay? There were other people that were captives there in Israel. And what happened when one of the Egyptian slaves didn't do his job and he was beaten by one of the Egyptian officials? We actually have some Egyptian art showing this. Here's a guy getting a beating. Here's another one getting a beating. Of course, what Moses did was he killed the Egyptian beating that Israelite. Okay? He's going to flee over to the land of Midian. By the way, Midian is further north than that map has it. I'm not going to deal with that, but that's where he's going to flee, where he's going to marry into the family there, have some kids and so forth. And at the end of 40 years, after Thutmose III had died, and he's the only guy that fits, by the way, all of this is Thutmose III, he sees the burning bush. The Lord tells him to go back. Okay? Next slide. Now, when he goes back, one of the miracles he's going to perform is he's going to take and have Aaron throw down his rod. It's going to turn into a snake, and it's going to eat the snakes from the rods of the Egyptian priests, right? Remember that story? Next slide. The interesting feature is this is called the ceremony of the opening of the mouth. See that one priest, he has in his hand a wand or a staff, whatever you want to call it. You see what the head is? It's the head of a snake. So when they throw down their staffs, realize they had the heads of the snake. These look like snakes. And then Aaron throws his down and his snake eats theirs. Okay? Okay. Now, this is interesting. I can't spend a lot of time on it, but there's actually a document that talks about the Nile River turning to blood. There's a huge debate about whether this is dealing with the actual curse that Moses brought on. I'll leave it up to you to decide. It is interesting. Okay? Next one. Okay? And so Moses and Aaron took soot from the, I'm going to just deal very briefly with some of the 10 plagues on Egypt. Took soot from before Pharaoh and Moses and tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on men and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and all of the Egyptians. But Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as Yahweh had told Moses that he would do. Okay, next slide. This is Amenhotep II's mummy in the museum in Egypt. I want you to look very carefully at his face and neck. See the scars there? There's a discussion about those scars. Are we out of time? Yell when you're ready. Okay. See the scars there? You see those? How about that? Right, Pharaoh? Scars? There's a discussion about that. There's two views. It happened when he was being mummified. The problem with that is we have about 10,000 mummies and only a couple of them have this. and all of them that have it come from this very same period of time. Okay, are you with me? Another one is, oh, this is inherited. So some kind of inherited skin disease they have. Well, I don't think it's inherited. I think you're looking at actually that very curse. Okay? Next one. What time do I need to stop, Pastor?
Well, I know you have a lot more content you
I
can
do.
get to, so we have about 20 minutes left. So I do want to kind of give the opportunity for any questions.
Let me go very quickly.
Okay,
I want to
yeah.
show you. I want to show you the firstborn son of Pharaoh,
Okay.
and we won't do it. Okay, very quickly. Go down. Keep going through some of these things. I believe this is the firstborn son of Pharaoh. Most unusual mummy ever found. He was found wrapped in a sheepskin. Okay. Well, a couple more slides very quickly. There's another shot of him. He's called the Screaming Mummy. Okay, another shot, and keep going. Keep going. Here he is. This is Amenhotep II you just saw. Notice these two guys look an awful lot alike. Show me one more slide. This is, you sometimes said, this is the father of this guy. They don't look anything alike. But we can't get into it, but I wanted to show you what I consider to be the firstborn son of Pharaoh. Okay, we'll stop there. I could go on for another hour on this, but we have to quit. Okay? But any questions you might have. Did I lose you in all this? I threw a lot of stuff at you, and I apologize. But I wanted you to see there is a lot of archaeological evidence that matches up with both Joseph and also with the Exodus.
Yeah, do you have any questions related to this, or even just archaeological evidence for the Bible at all? Hold on, we're going to do a microphone. Excuse me, sir. Sir, will you ask that in the microphone?
What are we trying to prove on all this discussion? What was the thesis we were trying to promote to begin with?
Okay, basically what I'm trying to show you is the Bible is historically accurate. Realize that critics of the Bible, the first thing they say is, we don't have any evidence of that, and the Bible is false. So that basically is what apologetics is about. It's showing you that the Bible is accurate. It is true. Okay? So the purpose of this is to show you there's evidence for what you have in Scripture. For you, that's not a problem. But if you've got someone who's sitting on the fence, whether they're going to become a believer or not, sometimes this can be very important for them. And I wanted you to have some confidence that the Word of God is true. I could show you a whole bunch of stuff.
All right.
I had a question about are those stone figures? You have a picture.
Of the
That's one of the
statues?
the statues. Are
Yes.
they made out of stone?
Yes.
And do you think they resemble the person they're supposed to be?
Pretty much so, yes. I could show you some pictures, for example, of pharaohs and their mummies. For example, like Ramses II. I don't have it in this presentation, but we have pictures of him and his mummy. He's very old when he died, by the way. He died in his 90s. But you can still see that it's the same guy. The picture does match, the statues does match the mummy.
And so when they peel off the wrappings, what is it like?
It's a lot like leather. Basically, what a mummification was a lot like, you have to be old enough to appreciate this. The old style of making a ham was to take and dry it out and pack it in salt. What they did in mummification was they would take, and that mummy I was showing you, very interesting by the way, because this didn't take place to it. They would slit open the side, take out all the internal organs. They would set the heart aside, and it would be mummified. Internal organs are put in 4 jars called canopic jars. And all we find there, occasionally you'll find a little shriveled up, dried up set of lungs. For the most part, it's just dust. But there are 4 jars called canopic jars that they're placed in. They take the brain out through the nose. It's got too much liquid in it. And apparently just threw it away. Then they take the mummy and they pack it in a substance called natron. It's kind of like salt and bicarbonate of soda all kind of mixed together. It naturally occurs in Egypt. And they pack the mummy in that for 40 days. And what it does is it dries the mummy out. It's basically a drying out process. So the net result of that is what you end up with most mummies is you end up with, looks like a skeleton with a piece of leather over it. Okay? Does that help? Yeah.
Pass that down. No, please. Thank you.
Okay, I thought that Moses assimilated to Egyptian culture, and I don't know if I read that in the Bible or if it was just from the felt board in Sunday school as a kid. But I thought he looked like an Egyptian, and that's why the brothers didn't recognize him. So why would that statue have the mushroom haircut?
Okay,
Did
apparently,
I said Joseph, I meant Joseph, not Moses.
apparently he went back to his old hairdo at the end of his life. That's the only thing I can tell you. He went back to his old hairdo at the end of his life. Okay, does that help?
That helps.
Which does make a lot of sense. He's back down there. He's actually in the area where the Israelites are. So it would be natural for him to go back to his old hairdo. Yeah.
You know, this presentation has really helped me a lot. I've got a nephew that does not believe in the Bible. I started talking to him about the Bible, and he said, you know, you go back in history, there was no Bible. Man just wrote the Bible. And of course, his father didn't believe in it either. Luckily, my sister passed away a couple of years ago, did believe. But he says, you know, there's no Bible back a couple thousand years ago. Man wrote the Bible. And so this right here helps me a lot. It helps me to try and better understand.
Well, thank you. There is a lot, that's a very common misconception, that there's nothing supporting the Bible historically. And there's a lot, I've just touched the surface for you. I mean, I could take you through Jericho and show you that Jericho is a perfect match. And yet you'll pick up textbooks that will say, oh, there's no evidence to match Joseph. What I can tell you is this: they have fallen down walls, they have a burned city, it was burned after the walls fell down, but what they do is, oh, they say that dates to 1500, 1550, and we know that the Bible says the Exodus took place in 1270, the late date of the Exodus. So there's no evidence for the Exodus, or the fall of Jericho, and actually it's a perfect match for the fall of Jericho. Well, for me it's very interesting. Remember one of the things that the Lord said at Jericho? Take out all the metals, take out the gold, the silver, the iron, which is interesting there too. And, you know, set that aside for the Lord. You know, in the burn level layer there at Jericho, and the properly dated, as my friend Brian Wood dated it, by the way, it's about that thick. In the burn layer there at Jericho, they have yet to find one single metal item. And yet they found jar. When did the Exodus take place? Or the conquest of Jericho take place? It took place at the time of Passover. When's that? Believe it or not, in Israel, they harvest the grain in the spring. Okay? They found, and that's what, remember the stalks of grain and so forth on the roof of, what's her name? Rahab's house. It was harvest time. They found jar after jar. This is highly unusual. Jar after jar after jar of charred grain. Whenever an army comes through, first thing they do is to steal all the food. And someone has left and burned all the grain, and they took out all the metal items. The only thing that matches that is what the Bible says. Are you with me? Understand? So there's all kinds of evidence, but realize the Satan is out there. Yeah, I believe in Satan. He gives bad information, and you're going to run into it all the time. I mean, I could give you all kinds of evidence of the Bible's accuracy. I mean, literally, I could take the rest of the night giving this stuff. Okay, any other questions, or we should stop now?
I know there's a lot of talk about the different gods and how they're addressed. He talks about the Elohim of Israel.
Okay.
Would it have been weird for this God person to hear about another God?
Yes.
Was there something big and significant in that word Elohim? Talk about this Elohim or that Elohim?
Okay. The word Elohim is very interesting for a number of reasons. As far as the Pharaoh would go, he would have known very well who Elohim was, or Al. He would have known that without a doubt. We actually, during the reign of, I talk about Amenhotep III, he actually had a guy named Aper El, who was his vizier. That El, there's the name El of Elohim. So he would have known Elohim, no question about it. Elohim appears in Canaanite texts. Okay? There's a reason why, you have to realize, in Canaanite religion, El is an old god who's senile, he can't get the job done anymore, and he has a son who is very immoral, by the way, and a vicious god in many ways named Baal-Hadad. Okay? And I think that's one of the reasons why the Lord is saying, I want to separate myself from that concept of what God is like. Understand? And I think that's why he takes another name, Yahweh, which means the existing one, the eternal one, to separate himself. Okay? Other questions? I wish I could have got Doc not.
Yeah, I have a question. For the Exodus, with the Israelites en masse leaving, and then the Egyptian army perishing, what kind of evidence has been uncovered to suggest this major happening?
Is an excellent question. The interesting feature is this: Thutmose III undertook about 20 military campaigns. Just about every year he ruled, he would go on a military campaign. And he actually conquered all of Canaan. He's going to lose it relatively quickly. After it's going to be lost. Conquered all of Canaan. He campaigned clear up into what's northern Iraq and part of what today would be Armenia. Campaigned well to the north there. Okay? So he had about 20 campaigns. His son, Amenhotep II, the pharaoh of the Exodus, undertakes 2 campaigns. Okay? He brags about how great a military man he is. The first campaign he undertook just before the Exodus. Okay? The second campaign he undertakes right after the Exodus. By the way, after Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, there's no pharaoh taking any kind of army up into Canaan. They're just not going to do it. Now the interesting feature about that second campaign, which is in about 1446, Amenhotep II goes up into Canaan and he brings back 100,000 prisoners of war. Men, women, and children. Guess where he settled them? Settled in the very place where the Israelites left. Okay, are you with me? So yeah, there's a lot of evidence. And the army doesn't go out after that almost. It's a long time before you have another army that goes out to campaign up in the land and up to the north and so forth. So something's happened to the army. And as I said, 100,000 people were brought back. They're settled in the land of Goshen, what they are. They're a replacement for the missing Israelites. There's no question about it. You never read that anywhere, but both Charles Ayling and Doug Petrovich, who are both believers, both Egyptologists, have degrees in Egyptology, both say the same thing as replacements. Does that help? Another interesting thing is Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, who had a version of monotheism, sort of, okay? He quit worshiping all the other gods, he closed up their temples. Now the interesting thing about Akhenaten is, he's getting letters from kings in the land of Canaan, and those kings are saying, send us some troops, we're being attacked by Habiru in Egyptian. Translated, Hebrews. Okay? And he won't send up a single troop. I wonder why. He will not send any troops at all. They're called the Amarna letters. Have you heard that before? Okay? He will not send up any troops. Okay, any more questions?
We have
or should
time
we
for
finish?
1 or 2 more questions, so I'm going to go Randy and then Linda, we're done.
You mentioned Yahweh in some of this text here, and then you mentioned something about Jehovah, and then you broke off about, so I'm curious about the Jehovah part.
Okay. According to Jewish tradition, you're not supposed to say the name Yahweh, called the Tetragrammaton. So whenever they would read from the Old Testament that has the name Yahweh in it, what they do is they actually read the name Adonai. Okay? They may say Yahweh in the text, but they're going to read Adonai, which means Lord. What happened was then, when they began to put vowels, and I'd have to explain to you in Hebrew, but when they began to put vowels in the Hebrew text, the Hebrew alphabet is basically made up of nothing but consonants, no vowels. Later on, when they had scrolls that were to be read in the synagogue, to help the people out, to help them remember, don't pronounce the name Yahweh, they put vowels in. The vowels that they put in, what you have with the name Jehovah, is actually the vowels for Elohim and the consonants for Yahweh. It's an artificial name. Nothing wrong with it, but realize that's where it comes from. Does that help? Okay? Yeah.
Is it difficult to get permission to do a dig?
It depends on where it's at, you know, and to a certain extent who you are, but not really. If you want to dig, by the way, I've got friends who are digging. A friend of mine is digging at Shiloh right now and has made some remarkable discoveries there. Scott Stripling is his name. Sometimes you'll see his name in the newspapers and so forth. So if you want to dig at Shiloh, I'll set you up there. A friend of mine for years was digging at the city of Ai. That one's completed, so won't send you there. But if you want to dig, I can set you up with some friends of mine who are digging. Okay? So we
All
better
right.
close?
And my kids love digging in my backyard too. So well, Dr. Billington, I am purposely having you guys introduce yourself at the end because you prove that you know your stuff in your presentation. But just tell us quickly your career, your education.
I have taught as a college professor now for about, I'm retired now. I taught at the University of Northwestern in St. Paul. That's where Billy Graham was the president a long, long time ago, long before I was there. I was there for 22 years. Before that, I have a PhD in ancient history from the University of Iowa. I have 4 degrees altogether, one in religion, one in Bible and religion, and then the rest of them are in history. My specialty is ancient history and medieval history and archaeology, as you can see. What else can I tell you? I'm the president of the Near East Archaeological Society, which is an evangelical group of archaeologists and historians. And I'll be presenting at, we have a meeting in November, and it's in San Diego. And I'll actually be presenting on that Unknown Man E, the Screaming Mummy, and arguing at that. You got a little bit of it tonight. The argument that actually is the mummy of the firstborn son of Pharaoh.
Well, we're so thankful for your time. We can just say thank you. And the Bible tells us we share with those who teach us and we honor those who teach us. And so I'm going to ask Mick Mass to pray for you, but can you just share a couple ways we can be praying for you before we do closing prayer?
Sure.
Go ahead and share how we can be praying.
Oh, well, you know, one thing you can pray for is, you know, the archaeologists who are active. For example, I was talking about Scott Stripling. Scott Stripling is the head archaeologist at Shiloh. Tremendous thing, by the way. It's interesting to see the Israelis gave him the concession to dig at that very special site. And he's making some remarkable discoveries there already. But he's also coming under fire. One, you have to realize archaeology is extremely political these days. So what am I talking about? For example, when I taught at Wayne State University, which is in downtown Detroit, and realized that there is a Muslim community there and there's a Jewish community there. I remember very well walking by one day in the student center, and they had an area there where campus functions could put on displays. I walked by there one day, and here was one for Israel. I walked by the next, well, it was about a week or later, I walked by, and the Muslims had put up their display, Palestinians. Here was a map of the Holy Land, and there was no Israel on it. And I found out very quickly in class, when I start talking about Canaan and various things like that, I'm not talking about ancient history, I'm talking about modern politics, who owns the land. And I mean, I had them tell me, you know, which I thought was a little bit silly. Well, I had Palestinians telling me that they were Canaanites. Well, there might be a little Canaanite blood there, but probably not very much. Mostly Arab blood. Okay? So you can pray for people like Scott. He's come under some fire in Israel. Some of the Palestinians are not happy with him because they think he's supporting the Israeli claim to the land. Archaeology, as I said, can be very political. So you can pray for people like Scott, who's digging. I am not involved in any digs. I know these people, I support them, and so forth. If you've got some kids and children that want to dig, you might send them over to Israel to do some digging. But you know, pray for some of these archaeologists. I would not go to Egypt today. I have an acquaintance who's doing archaeological work in Egypt. You might pray for their safety. I mean, it can get very dangerous. For example, I'll give you one example. And they're digging at probably the site of the city of Bethsaida. And this guy is not a Christian. But while I was there visiting that site, they found a skeleton. Now the skeleton was almost certainly not Jewish. But Orthodox Jews are very nasty whenever you dig up the bones of a Jew. They insist that they be reburied. Are you with me? And it was a very interesting discovery. The only crucified man we found with a nail going through his ankle bone. It was very interesting. They insisted, they took out the nail, you could go see the nail, but you can't see the ankle bone. It had to be reburied. One of the problems is if you're doing archaeological work there in Israel and you dig up an old skeleton, they're going to assume it's Jewish and you better do what they want you to do. If they don't, they're going to show up with clubs and rocks and go after you. And they're not going to be nice. They literally will throw stones at you and come at you with clubs. So you can pray for people, especially Scott, because he's been in the newspaper. The Palestinians are kind of after him because he's found some stuff that supports Jewish ownership of the land. And he's not very popular. So you remember him. You know, and maybe the meeting, we have a lot of good archaeologists will be going to San Diego next month. And you know, they can fly in there and fly out and not have any problems. California is not a good place right now. Okay? Thanks, Pastor.
Let's pray.
Father, we just thank you so much for the information that was shared here tonight. We thank you for those archaeologists who are working to bring the truth to light, Lord. We just pray your protection on them, especially on Scott and his team. I just pray, Lord, that we know that you can bring the truth from even those that don't worship you, that you can make it good and make it right. And Lord, we just thank you so much for the time and the dedication that your servants who are uncovering history. And we just pray that you will protect them. And thank you again for our time together. I just pray everything in the strong name of Jesus.